Sarah Martinez had dreamed of serving her country since she was 12 years old. Back then, she would watch her older brother Marcus polish his army boots every Sunday morning, the leather gleaming under the kitchen light. She would sit at the breakfast table eating her cereal and imagine herself in uniform too. But unlike Marcus, who wanted to be on the front lines, Sarah knew she wanted to help heal the wounded. She wanted to be the person who brought soldiers back to their families. Now at 28, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood in the medical tent at Forward Operating Base Thunder, Afghanistan. The desert heat pressed against the canvas walls like an unwelcome visitor. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she checked the IV drip for Private Johnson, who had stepped on an improvised explosive device 2 days ago. His leg was badly injured, but he would live. He would go home to his wife and newborn daughter. Sarah had been at FOB Thunder for 8 months. She had seen things that would stay with her forever. Young soldiers arriving with injuries that no person should ever have to endure. Families back home waiting for news. The weight of life and death decisions made in split seconds. But despite all the challenges of war, the hardest part of Sarah's deployment had nothing to do with the enemy outside the base walls. The harassment had started 3 weeks after she arrived. It began with Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a supply sergeant who thought he owned every conversation in the mess hall. Rodriguez was a big man with thick arms and a laugh that was too loud. He had been deployed 4 times and acted like that made him the king of the base. The first time he bothered Sarah, she was eating lunch alone, reading a letter from her mother back in Texas. Well, what do we have here?" Rodriguez had said, sliding his tray across from hers without being invited. "A pretty little nurse all by herself. You know, Martinez, I could show you around, teach you how things really work around here." Sarah had looked up from her mother's letter about the new flowers in the garden back home. "Thank you, Sergeant, but I'm fine." "Come on now, don't be shy. A woman like you shouldn't be alone in a place like this. You need someone to protect you, someone strong." He flexed his arms dramatically, causing his friends at nearby tables to chuckle. Sarah had folded the letter carefully and stood up. "I can protect myself, Sergeant Rodriguez, and I'm not looking for anything other than doing my job and serving my country." Rodriguez's face had darkened. "Playing hard to get, huh? I like that. Makes it more interesting." From that day forward, Rodriguez made Sarah's life difficult whenever he could. He would make inappropriate comments when she walked by. He would find excuses to visit the medical tent when she was working, always with some made-up supply issue that needed her immediate attention. He would sit too close to her during briefings and whisper comments that made her skin crawl. But Rodriguez wasn't working alone. He had recruited his friends to join in what they seemed to think was a funny game. Corporal Danny Weeks would make kissing sounds whenever Sarah walked past the motor pool. Specialist Jim Hayes would ask her loud, inappropriate questions about her personal life when other soldiers were around, trying to embarrass her in front of her patients. The worst part was how they operated. They were always careful to do it when no officers were around. They knew exactly where the cameras were and where they weren't. They had perfected the art of harassment without leaving evidence. When Sarah would try to report incidents, it became her word against theirs, and they had been at the base longer. Captain Williams, the base medical officer and Sarah's direct supervisor, was a good man, but he was overwhelmed. He was managing medical operations for the entire base while dealing with his own deployment stress. When Sarah first approached him about the harassment, he listened carefully and promised to look into it. "I'll talk to their supervisors," Captain Williams had said. "This kind of behavior has no place in our military." But talking to supervisors didn't help. Rodriguez and his friends just became more careful about when and where they bothered Sarah. They learned to make their comments when no witnesses were around. They would brush against her in narrow hallways and act like it was an accident. They would stand too close when she was working and breathe down her neck, making her extremely uncomfortable. Sarah began to dread leaving her quarters. She would plan her routes around the base to avoid areas where Rodriguez and his friends usually spent their time. She started eating meals at different times to avoid the mess hall when they were there. She threw herself into her work even more, staying late in the medical tent and arriving early, hoping that being busy would protect her. The situation got worse during her 4th month at the base. Sarah was walking back to her quarters after a particularly difficult day. 3 soldiers had been brought in with serious injuries from a roadside bomb attack. She had worked for 14 hours straight, barely taking time to eat or drink water. She was exhausted both physically and emotionally. The path from the medical tent to the living quarters passed by the supply depot. As Sarah walked past, Rodriguez stepped out of the shadows with Weeks and Hayes beside him. "Well, if it isn't our favorite nurse," Rodriguez said, blocking her path. "You look tired, Martinez. Maybe you need someone to help you relax." Sarah was too tired to deal with their games. "Please move, Sergeant. I just want to go to my quarters." "What's the magic word?" Weeks said, grinning. "Maybe if you ask real nice, we'll let you pass." "Maybe if you give Rodriguez here a little kiss," Hayes added, "we'll all be friends." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she also felt something else: fear. It was getting dark, and this area of the base was usually empty at this time of evening. She was alone with 3 men who had been making her life miserable for months. "I said move," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Rodriguez stepped closer. "Or what? You'll report us again? We're just having a conversation, Martinez. 3 soldiers talking to a fellow service member. Nothing wrong with that." "Just a friendly conversation," Weeks agreed. "Maybe we want to know how your day was, how those injured soldiers are doing, whether you need any help carrying your heavy equipment." They were surrounding her now, not touching her, but making it clear she couldn't leave without pushing past them. Sarah's heart was beating fast. She had been trained in self-defense, but she also knew that fighting with fellow soldiers would create a bigger problem for her than it would for them. "Let me pass," she said again. "Say please," Rodriguez said, "like a good girl." That phrase made Sarah's anger override her fear. She was not a girl. She was a commissioned officer in the United States Army. She had earned her rank and her position through years of hard work and study. She had saved lives in this desert. She deserved the same respect as any other soldier. "I am Lieutenant Martinez," she said loudly, "and I order you to move." Rodriguez laughed. "Oh, now she's pulling rank. Did you hear that, boys? The little nurse thinks she can give us orders." "I don't think," Sarah said. "I know. You are required to follow orders from a commissioned officer." "What are you going to do if we don't?" Hayes asked. "Court-martial us for having a conversation?" They were right, and they knew it. Sarah had no real power in this situation. They weren't technically disobeying orders because she hadn't given them a specific military command. They weren't technically threatening her because they hadn't said anything directly threatening. They were operating in the gray area that bullies always find. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, Rodriguez stepped aside with an exaggerated bow. "Of course, Lieutenant Martinez. We wouldn't want to keep you from your important duties." Sarah walked past them quickly, her hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. Behind her, she could hear them laughing. That night, Sarah sat in her small quarters and wrote a detailed report about the incident. She described exactly what happened, when it happened, and who was involved. She documented every incident of harassment she could remember from the past 4 months. She was going to take this to Captain Williams first thing in the morning, and if he couldn't help her, she would go up the chain of command as high as necessary. But when morning came, Sarah discovered that Rodriguez had gotten there first. He had filed a complaint claiming that Lieutenant Martinez had been abusing her rank and creating a hostile work environment by threatening enlisted soldiers with court-martial for casual conversation. Weeks and Hayes had signed statements supporting Rodriguez's version of events. Captain Williams called Sarah into his office with a troubled expression on his face. "Lieutenant, I need to ask you about last night." Sarah handed him her written report. "Sir, I was going to bring this to you today. Sergeant Rodriguez and his friends have been harassing me for months." Captain Williams read both reports carefully. "These are very different versions of what happened, Lieutenant." "Sir, with respect, Sergeant Rodriguez is lying. He and his friends have been making my life miserable since I got here. They've been careful to do it when no officers are around, but last night they went too far." "I believe you, Lieutenant," Captain Williams said quietly. "But believing you and proving it are two different things. It's your word against three of theirs. And they've turned it around to make you look like the problem." "So they get away with it?" Sarah asked. "I'm going to keep investigating. I'm going to talk to other soldiers, see if anyone witnessed anything. But Martinez, you need to be careful. These men are making it look like you're the one causing problems. If this goes up the chain of command, it might not go the way you expect." Sarah left Captain Williams's office feeling more frustrated than ever. She had followed all the proper procedures. She had documented everything. She had tried to handle the situation through official channels, but Rodriguez and his friends were better at playing the system than she was. The harassment didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Now Rodriguez would smile at her in front of officers, acting like they were best friends. He would loudly compliment her work where others could hear, then whisper crude comments when they were alone. He had turned the situation around so that if she complained again, it would look like she was the problem. Other soldiers on the base began to notice the tension. Some avoided getting involved because they didn't want to take sides in what looked like a complicated situation. Others seemed to believe Rodriguez's version of events and began treating Sarah with suspicion. A few soldiers tried to be supportive, but they were outnumbered and didn't want to become targets themselves. Sarah began to feel completely isolated. She continued doing her job with the same dedication and skill as always, but she felt like she was fighting a war on two fronts, against the enemy outside the base walls and against her own fellow soldiers inside them. 6 months into her deployment, Sarah was beginning to wonder if she had made a mistake by joining the military. She loved being a nurse. She loved helping wounded soldiers. She believed in the mission and wanted to serve her country, but she couldn't understand how the same institution that talked about honor and integrity could allow soldiers like Rodriguez to make her life miserable with no consequences. Then something unexpected happened. Sarah was working a late shift in the medical tent when a helicopter landed outside. This wasn't unusual. Medical evacuations happened at all hours. But when the helicopter crew brought in the wounded soldier, Sarah noticed something different about the pilot who helped carry the stretcher. He was Native American, probably in his early 30s, with serious dark eyes and black hair pulled back under his flight helmet. There was something about the way he moved that reminded Sarah of her grandfather, who had served in Vietnam, a quiet strength and dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. After they had transferred the wounded soldier to Sarah's care, the pilot lingered while his crew prepared for their return flight. He watched Sarah work with a focused attention that made her slightly self-conscious. "You're good at this," he said quietly when Sarah had stabilized the patient. "Thank you," Sarah replied. "It's my job." "No," the pilot said. "This is more than just a job for you. I can see it in how you work. You actually care." Sarah looked up from her patient. The pilot was watching her with those serious dark eyes, but his expression was kind. "What's your name, Lieutenant?" he asked. "Martinez, Sarah Martinez." The pilot nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Martinez. I'll remember that." Before Sarah could ask his name, Rodriguez's voice boomed across the medical tent. "Well, well, what do we have here? Our favorite nurse making new friends?" The pilot turned toward Rodriguez with an expression that made Sarah take a step back. There was something dangerous in his eyes. something that made Rodriguez's loud confidence falter for just a moment. "Is there a problem here, Sergeant?" the pilot asked quietly. "No problem at all," Rodriguez said, but his voice was less sure than usual. "Just checking on our medical staff, making sure Lieutenant Martinez has everything she needs." The pilot looked back at Sarah, then at Rodriguez, then at Sarah again. Sarah could see him processing the situation, understanding things that hadn't been said. "Good," the pilot said finally. "Lieutenant Martinez is doing important work here. She deserves respect." With that, he turned and walked out of the medical tent, leaving Rodriguez speechless for perhaps the first time since Sarah had known him. Sarah didn't know who the pilot was, but something about that brief encounter gave her a feeling she hadn't had in months. Hope. The mysterious pilot's visit had shaken Rodriguez more than Sarah expected. For 3 days after the encounter, he avoided the medical tent completely. When they crossed paths in other areas of the base, he would nod politely and keep walking. Sarah began to hope that maybe the harassment was finally over. She was wrong. On the 4th day, Rodriguez returned to his old behavior with a vengeance. But now there was something different about it. Before, his harassment had seemed almost playful to him, like a game he enjoyed playing. Now there was an edge of anger, as if Sarah had somehow embarrassed him in front of the pilot. "Enjoying your new boyfriend, Martinez?" he sneered when she walked past the supply depot. "Too bad he's not around to protect you all the time." Weeks and Hayes had picked up on their leader's new attitude. They began making comments about Sarah's special friend and suggesting that she was getting preferential treatment because of her connections. They spread rumors that Sarah was involved with the helicopter pilot, despite the fact that she had spoken to him for maybe 5 minutes total. The rumors bothered Sarah more than she wanted to admit. She prided herself on her professionalism and her reputation as a dedicated nurse. Having people suggest that she was advancing her career through personal relationships felt like an attack on everything she had worked for. But worse than the rumors was the escalation in harassment. Rodriguez and his friends seemed to feel that they had been challenged and needed to reassert their dominance. They began, accidentally, bumping into Sarah more frequently. They would stand in doorways and force her to squeeze past them. They would time their visits to the mess hall to coincide with her meal times and sit at nearby tables, talking loudly about inappropriate topics while staring at her. Sarah tried to ignore them, but it was becoming impossible. The stress was affecting her work. She would find herself distracted during medical procedures, worried about when the next incident would occur. She started making small mistakes, nothing that put patients in danger, but errors that a nurse of her experience shouldn't be making. Captain Williams noticed her declining performance during their weekly medical staff meeting. After the other nurses and medics had left, he asked Sarah to stay behind. "Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you okay?" Sarah wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to explain how Rodriguez's escalating harassment was affecting her ability to focus. She wanted to describe the constant stress of never knowing when she would be confronted or humiliated, but she had tried the official route before, and it hadn't worked. "I'm fine, sir. Just tired. It's been a busy few weeks." Captain Williams studied her face carefully. "Lieutenant, if someone is still bothering you, we need to address it. I know the situation with Sergeant Rodriguez didn't get resolved the way you wanted, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. With respect, sir, I think making another complaint would only make things worse. Martinez, you're a good nurse and a good officer. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. And if you change your mind about talking, my door is always open." Sarah appreciated Captain Williams' concern, but she had lost faith in the system's ability to protect her. She was going to have to find another way to deal with Rodriguez and his friends. That weekend, Sarah was assigned to night duty in the medical tent. Night shifts were usually quiet unless there was active combat, which gave her time to catch up on medical supply inventory and equipment maintenance. She was checking the expiration dates on medications when she heard helicopter rotors approaching. Sarah looked outside and saw the same helicopter that had brought in the wounded soldier a week earlier. Her heart rate increased slightly as she watched the aircraft land. She told herself she was just curious about whether they were bringing in patients, but she knew that wasn't entirely true. The pilot climbed out of the helicopter and walked toward the medical tent. He was wearing his flight suit and helmet, but Sarah recognized his walk and the way he carried himself. When he entered the tent, he pulled off his helmet and looked around until he spotted her. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said with a slight nod. "How are you doing?" "I'm well, thank you. Are you bringing in patients tonight?" "No patients this time. We're just stopping for fuel and a maintenance check." He paused. "I wanted to check on you." Sarah was surprised by his directness. "Check on me? The other day when I was here, I could tell something was bothering you." "That's Sergeant Rodriguez. He seemed like he was giving you trouble." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She barely knew this pilot, but he had picked up on the situation with Rodriguez immediately. Either he was very perceptive, or the harassment was more obvious than she realized. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said finally. The pilot studied her face the same way Captain Williams had earlier that week. "What's your first name, Lieutenant?" "Sarah." "Sarah. I'm Captain Joseph Running Bear. Most people call me Joe." He paused. "And I think you're handling more than you should have to." The way he said it made Sarah feel like someone finally understood what she was going through. Not trying to fix it or give her advice, just acknowledging that it was difficult. "How do you know?" she asked. "I've seen it before." "Different places, different situations, but the same basic thing. People who think they can push others around because they believe they have the power to get away with it. Were you able to stop it when you saw it before?" Joe was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. Not always. But I learned that bullies usually keep pushing until someone pushes back harder than they expected." Before Sarah could ask what he meant by that, Rodriguez's voice echoed across the base from the direction of the supply depot. "Martinez! Hey, Martinez! Where's our favorite nurse?" Sarah's stomach tightened. It was after midnight, and Rodriguez had no legitimate reason to be looking for her. Joe noticed her reaction immediately. "He does this often?" Joe asked quietly. "More often lately?" Rodriguez's voice was getting closer. "I know you're around here somewhere, Martinez. Come out, wherever you are." Joe stepped toward the entrance of the medical tent. "Stay here," he told Sarah. "Captain, you don't need to get involved in this." But Joe was already walking outside. Through the tent opening, Sarah could see Rodriguez approaching with Weeks beside him. They stopped when they saw Joe standing between them and the medical tent. "Well, well," Rodriguez said, but his voice had lost some of its usual confidence. "If it isn't the flyboy, what brings you to our little medical facility so late at night?" "Official business," Joe said simply. "Official business with our nurse? Must be some pretty interesting official business." Joe didn't respond to the implication. He just stood there, relaxed but alert, blocking Rodriguez's path to the medical tent. "Look, flyboy, I don't know what you think is going on here, but Martinez and I have an understanding. We go way back. Isn't that right, Martinez?" Rodriguez called toward the tent. Sarah didn't answer. Joe didn't move. "She's probably busy," Joe said. "Maybe you should come back during normal duty hours if you have medical business to discuss." "Medical business," Weeks laughed. "That's a good one." Rodriguez stepped closer to Joe. The supply sergeant was bigger and heavier, but Joe didn't seem intimidated. If anything, he seemed to relax even more. "I don't think you understand the situation here, Captain," Rodriguez said, emphasizing Joe's rank mockingly. "Martinez and I have been getting to know each other for months. We have a special relationship. So maybe you should mind your own business and get back in your helicopter." "I understand the situation perfectly," Joe said quietly. The question is, do you? There was something in Joe's voice that made both Rodriguez and Weeks take a step back. Sarah couldn't see Joe's expression from inside the tent, but whatever Rodriguez saw in his face made the bigger man reconsider his approach. "This isn't over," Rodriguez muttered. "No," Joe agreed. "It's not." Rodriguez and Weeks turned and walked away, but not before Rodriguez called back. "Sweet dreams, Martinez. See you tomorrow." Joe waited until they were completely gone before returning to the medical tent. Sarah was standing near the entrance, having heard the entire exchange. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Joe replied. "That kind of behavior is unacceptable. You shouldn't have to deal with it alone. I've tried going through official channels. It doesn't work. They're careful about what they do and when they do it. And they have more people willing to back up their version of events than I do." Joe nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen that before, too. The system works when everyone follows the rules, but bullies don't follow rules. They just get better at hiding what they're doing. So what do I do? You keep doing your job. You keep being the excellent nurse and officer that you are, and you let me worry about Rodriguez. Captain Running Bear, I can't ask you to fight my battles for me." "You're not asking. I'm volunteering. And call me Joe." Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not because someone was going to solve her problems for her, but because someone finally understood what she was dealing with and wasn't going to pretend it wasn't happening. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Why are you helping me? You don't really know me." Joe was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if she had overstepped somehow. Then he spoke. "My grandmother always told me that we're all connected. When someone is being hurt, it hurts all of us. When someone stands up to bullies, it makes all of us stronger." He paused. "And I recognize something in you that I see in myself." "What's that?" "You became a nurse because you want to help people. You joined the military because you believe in service and honor. But you're discovering that not everyone in uniform shares those values." Sarah nodded. "It's disappointing." "Disappointing, but not surprising. My people have been dealing with bullies for a long time. We've learned that sometimes the only way to stop them is to show them that their victims aren't as helpless as they thought." Joe's radio crackled with a message from his crew chief. Their maintenance check was complete, and they needed to return to their base. "I have to go," he said. "But Sarah, I want you to know something. You're not alone in this anymore." After Joe left, Sarah sat in the medical tent thinking about their conversation. For the first time in months, she felt like someone was truly on her side, not just willing to listen to her complaints or offer sympathy, but actually prepared to do something about the situation. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed changes in how Rodriguez and his friends behaved around her. They still made inappropriate comments and found ways to bother her, but there was less confidence in their actions. They kept looking around, as if they expected Joe to appear at any moment. Rodriguez in particular seemed nervous. He would start to approach Sarah, then change his mind when he remembered Joe's warning. But his nervousness made him angrier, and Sarah could see him building up to something bigger. The confrontation came a week later. Sarah was walking back from the mess hall when Rodriguez stepped out of an alley between two buildings. This time he was alone, which made Sarah more worried than if he had brought his usual support team. "We need to talk, Martinez," he said, blocking her path. "I have nothing to say to you, Sergeant." "Well, I have plenty to say to you. You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Getting your boyfriend to threaten me?" "Captain Running Bear is not my boyfriend, and he didn't threaten you. He just asked you to leave me alone." "Same thing. You think you can hide behind him forever? He's not always going to be around to protect you." Rodriguez stepped closer, and Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath. He had been drinking, which made him more unpredictable and dangerous. Let me explain something to you, Martinez. This is my base. I've been here longer than you. I know more people than you. And I have more friends than you. Your little flyboy friend can't change that. Sergeant Rodriguez, you're drunk. You should go back to your quarters before you do something you'll regret. The only thing I regret is not teaching you your place sooner. You think you're better than everyone else because you're an officer? You think your rank means something? Rodriguez grabbed Sarah's arm, not gently. Let me show you what rank really means around here. Sarah tried to pull away, but Rodriguez's grip tightened. For the first time since arriving at FOB Thunder, Sarah was genuinely afraid. Rodriguez was bigger and stronger than she was. They were alone, and he was drunk enough to do something that would ruin both their careers. "Let go of me, Sergeant. That's an order." Rodriguez laughed. "Orders? From you? I don't think so." Suddenly, a voice cut through the night air. "Sergeant Rodriguez!" Rodriguez spun around, still holding Sarah's arm. Joe Running Bear was standing at the end of the alley, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were two other men in flight suits, both looking very serious and very unhappy about what they were seeing. "Let go of the lieutenant, Sergeant," Joe said quietly. "Right now." Rodriguez released Sarah's arm, but didn't back down. "This is a private conversation, Captain. It doesn't concern you. When I see an enlisted man putting his hands on an officer against her will, it concerns me very much." Joe stepped closer, and Sarah could see that he was absolutely furious, though his voice remained calm. "It also concerns my friends here." One of Joe's companions spoke up. "Sergeant, I'm Chief Warrant Officer Martinez. Yes, same name, different family. And I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this situation before it gets out of hand." The other pilot added, "We saw everything, Sergeant. The whole thing. How you grabbed the lieutenant, how you refused to follow her order to release her. That's assault on a superior officer. That's a court-martial offense." Rodriguez looked around at the three pilots and seemed to realize that he had made a serious mistake. His drunken confidence was rapidly evaporating. "I wasn't assaulting anyone, we were just talking." "With your hands on her?" Chief Martinez asked. "That's an interesting way to have a conversation." Rodriguez released Sarah completely and stepped back. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. I've had a few drinks. Maybe I got a little too friendly. But I wasn't hurting anyone." "You're right about one thing," Joe said. "You have had too much to drink. And you did get too friendly. The question is, what happens next?" Sarah found her voice. "Captain Running Bear, I appreciate your help, but I can handle this from here." Joe looked at her carefully. "Are you sure, Lieutenant?" Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who was now sweating and clearly regretting his decision to confront her while drunk. She looked at the three pilots who had come to her rescue. She thought about months of harassment and her failed attempts to get help through official channels. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said formally, "you are drunk on duty, you have assaulted a superior officer, and you have been harassing me for months. I am going to file a formal complaint first thing in the morning, and this time I have witnesses." Rodriguez started to protest, but Chief Martinez cut him off. "Sergeant, I suggest you return to your quarters immediately and sober up, and I suggest you think very carefully about how you want to handle this situation. Because if Lieutenant Martinez decides to press charges, we'll all be happy to testify about what we saw here tonight." After Rodriguez stumbled away, Joe walked Sarah back to her quarters. The other two pilots said goodnight and headed toward the flight line. "How did you know to come looking for me?" Sarah asked. "We didn't. We were heading back from a mission briefing when we heard voices in that alley. When we realized it was you and Rodriguez and saw what was happening, we decided to intervene." "Joe, I can't thank you enough. If you hadn't shown up—" "You don't need to thank me, Sarah. You handled yourself perfectly. You gave him orders, you tried to de-escalate the situation, and when you had support, you stood up for yourself." They had reached Sarah's quarters. "What happens now?" she asked. Now you decide what you want to do. You have witnesses this time. You have evidence of assault. The system might actually work for you. Sarah thought about it. I'm going to file the complaint. Even if nothing comes of it, at least it will be on record. Good. And Sarah? This isn't over. Rodriguez is going to be even angrier now. He's going to feel like he's been humiliated and he might try to retaliate. You need to be careful. Will you still be around? Your missions, I mean. Joe smiled slightly. My squadron has been temporarily reassigned to provide closer support for this base. We'll be operating out of here for the next several weeks. Sarah felt relief wash over her. That's good to know. Get some sleep, Lieutenant. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. As Sarah prepared for bed, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. She was still facing the same problems with Rodriguez, but now she had allies. More importantly, she had rediscovered her own strength and courage. She was going to file that complaint in the morning, and this time, things would be different. Sarah woke up before her alarm, her mind already focused on what she had to do. Today, she would file a formal complaint against Sergeant Rodriguez with witnesses to back up her claims. She had been thinking about this moment for months, but now that it was here, she felt nervous and determined in equal measure. She dressed carefully in her cleanest uniform and made sure her appearance was perfect. She knew that everything would be scrutinized today, and she wanted to look like the professional officer she was. As she walked to Captain Williams's office, she carried a folder with detailed documentation of every incident she could remember, including the previous night's assault. Captain Williams was surprised to see her so early, but his expression grew serious when she explained why she was there. Lieutenant Martinez, are you absolutely certain you want to go through with this? Once we start the formal process, there's no going back. Yes, sir. I'm certain. Last night, Sergeant Rodriguez physically grabbed me and refused to obey a direct order. Captain Running Bear and 2 other pilots witnessed the entire incident. Captain Williams read through Sarah's documentation carefully. This is very thorough, Lieutenant, and having witnesses changes everything. I'll need to interview them as well. They're prepared to give statements, sir. Good. I have to tell you, Martinez, this is going to get complicated. Rodriguez has friends on this base, and they're not going to be happy about this. You need to be prepared for pushback. I understand, sir, but I can't continue to work effectively while being harassed and intimidated. Something has to change. Captain Williams nodded. You're absolutely right. I'll start the investigation immediately. In the meantime, I'm going to recommend that you be reassigned to different duty shifts to minimize contact with Rodriguez and his friends. Thank you, sir. As Sarah left Captain Williams' office, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For months, she had felt powerless and alone. Now, finally, she was taking control of her situation, but Rodriguez's friends moved quickly to try to control the narrative. By lunchtime, Weeks and Hayes were spreading their own version of events. According to them, Rodriguez had simply been trying to have a friendly conversation with Sarah when she overreacted and called her boyfriend to intimidate him. They claimed the whole thing was blown out of proportion by people who didn't understand the situation. Sarah could see the whispers and stares as she walked through the base. Some soldiers looked at her with sympathy and support. Others seemed to believe Rodriguez's version of events. A few appeared to be reserving judgment until they heard more facts. The investigation moved quickly. Captain Williams interviewed Joe Running Bear and the other 2 pilots who had witnessed Rodriguez grabbing Sarah. Their statements were clear and consistent. Rodriguez had been drunk, he had physically restrained a superior officer, and he had refused to obey her orders to release her. On the second day of the investigation, Sarah was working in the medical tent when Major Susan Chen, the base executive officer, arrived for an unannounced visit. Lieutenant Martinez, I need to speak with you about this situation with Sergeant Rodriguez. Sarah's heart sank. Major Chen was known to be a tough, no-nonsense officer who didn't appreciate drama or complications. Yes, ma'am. I've read your complaint and the witness statements. I've also heard from Sergeant Rodriguez and his supporters. This is turning into a significant issue that's affecting morale and unit cohesion. Sarah prepared herself for the lecture about how she should have handled things differently, or tried harder to work things out informally. Instead, Major Chen surprised her. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that this kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Sergeant Rodriguez's conduct toward you has been unprofessional and inappropriate, and what happened the other night crossed the line into criminal behavior." Sarah felt relief flooding through her. "Thank you, ma'am." "However," Major Chen continued, "I also want you to understand that pursuing formal charges is going to be difficult. Rodriguez's supporters are claiming that you've been hostile toward enlisted personnel and that you're using your relationship with the helicopter pilots to intimidate soldiers who try to interact with you." "Ma'am, that's not true. I've never been hostile to anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to do my job." "I believe you, Lieutenant. But perception matters in situations like this. What I'm going to do is offer you a choice. We can proceed with formal charges against Rodriguez, which will likely result in a lengthy investigation and possible court-martial. Or we can resolve this through administrative action, which would be faster and quieter, but might not give you the complete vindication you deserve." Sarah thought carefully about Major Chen's offer. What kind of administrative action? Rodriguez would be formally reprimanded and transferred to a different base. His friends would be counseled about appropriate professional behavior. And you would receive a formal commendation for your outstanding service as a nurse and your professionalism in handling a difficult situation. It wasn't everything Sarah had wanted, but it was more than she had ever expected to receive. Would the reprimand go in his permanent record? Yes, it would follow him for the rest of his career. And the transfer would happen soon? Within 2 weeks. Sarah made her decision. "I accept the administrative resolution, ma'am." "Good. I think that's the right choice. Lieutenant, I also want you to know that several soldiers have come forward since your complaint was filed. Apparently, Rodriguez and his friends have been causing problems for other people too, but no one wanted to be the first to speak up. Your courage in filing this complaint has given others the strength to tell their stories." That afternoon, Sarah was restocking medical supplies when Joe appeared in the entrance to the medical tent. She hadn't seen him since the night of the incident with Rodriguez, and she was eager to tell him about Major Chen's resolution. "Joe, I was hoping I'd see you. I have good news about the Rodriguez situation." But when Joe turned toward her, Sarah was startled by his expression. He looked formal and serious in a way she had never seen before. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said, using her full rank and name, "I need to speak with you about something important." Sarah was confused by his sudden formality. "Of course. What's going on?" Joe stepped further into the medical tent and closed the entrance flap behind him. When he turned back to face her, his expression was even more serious. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told you about myself. Something I think you should know." Sarah felt her stomach tighten with worry. "What is it?" "My full name is Captain Joseph Running Bear. I'm an Apache helicopter pilot assigned to the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment. But that's not the important part." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The important part is my grandfather." "Your grandfather?" "My grandfather was Chief Warrant Officer Thomas Running Bear. He served 3 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart. When he came home, he became a leader in our tribal government and spent his life fighting for veterans' rights and Native American sovereignty." Sarah wasn't sure why Joe was telling her this, but she could see that it was important to him. "He sounds like an incredible man." He was. But here's what matters for you, Sarah. When I was growing up, my grandfather told me stories about the war, not the exciting stories about combat missions, but the hard stories about how soldiers treated each other. He told me about officers who looked out for their people and officers who didn't. He told me about soldiers who stood up for what was right and soldiers who just went along with whatever was easiest. Joe stepped closer to Sarah, his expression intense. My grandfather told me that the most important thing a warrior can do is protect those who cannot protect themselves. He taught me that true honor comes not from winning battles against enemies, but from defending your own people against bullies and cowards. Sarah was beginning to understand. Joe, what are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that helping you wasn't just the right thing to do as a fellow soldier. It was the right thing to do as a warrior in the tradition of my grandfathers. You were standing alone against people who were using their power to hurt you. In my culture, that means you are a warrior too. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. No one had ever called her a warrior before. Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. My grandmother made this for me when I deployed. It's a medicine bundle. Sacred objects that are supposed to protect warriors in battle. I want you to have it. Joe, I can't take something that's sacred. That's part of your family, your tradition. Sarah, you don't understand. By standing up to Rodriguez and his friends, by refusing to let them break your spirit, you became part of our tradition. Warriors recognize other warriors, regardless of what tribe they come from. Joe handed her the small leather pouch. It was soft and warm from being carried close to his body. But there's something else, Joe continued. Something that my grandfather would have wanted me to do. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Joe stepped back and came to attention. Then, slowly and deliberately, he brought his right hand up in a crisp military salute. Ma'am, he said formally, on behalf of all the warriors who came before us, thank you for your service, your courage, and your honor. Sarah was so surprised that she almost forgot to return the salute. When she did, Joe held his position for a long moment, giving her the full military courtesy that her rank deserved, but that she had rarely received. When Joe finally lowered his hand, Sarah was crying openly. Joe, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. You just need to remember that you are a warrior, and warriors never stand alone. That evening, word spread through Fob Thunder that Sergeant Rodriguez was being transferred to another base. The official reason was administrative needs, but everyone understood what had really happened. Some soldiers were disappointed that their friend was leaving. Others were relieved that a troublemaker was finally facing consequences for his actions. Sarah was working late in the medical tent when Captain Williams stopped by to check on her. How are you holding up, Lieutenant? I'm good, sir. Actually, I'm better than good. I feel like myself again. That's what I hoped to hear. Martinez, I owe you an apology. I should have taken stronger action when you first came to me about Rodriguez. I let the situation go on too long because I was hoping it would resolve itself. Sir, you did what you could with the information you had. And when I had witnesses and evidence, you acted quickly and decisively. Still, a good leader protects his people. I failed to protect you. Captain Williams, you've been nothing but supportive since I got here. One mistake doesn't erase all the times you got it right. 3 days later, Rodriguez and his belongings were loaded onto a transport helicopter bound for his new assignment. Sarah watched from the medical tent as the helicopter lifted off. She felt no satisfaction at seeing him go, just relief that the constant stress and fear were finally over. Joe's squadron was also scheduled to rotate out the following week, but they had been given permission to stay an extra few days for maintenance and training. Joe used the extra time to spend more evenings talking with Sarah about everything except the Rodriguez situation. They talked about their families, their goals after the military, their favorite books and movies. Sarah learned that Joe had a degree in engineering and planned to work in renewable energy development after his military service ended. He learned that Sarah wanted to become a flight nurse so she could help wounded soldiers even closer to the battlefield. They discovered that they both loved hiking and camping and had grown up feeling responsible for taking care of other people. On Joe's last night at Fob Thunder, he and Sarah sat outside the medical tent watching the stars. The desert sky was incredibly clear, with more stars visible than either of them had ever seen back home. "I'm going to miss this place," Joe said quietly. "Not the war, obviously, but this. Sitting under these stars, talking with you." "I'm going to miss you too," Sarah admitted. "These past few weeks, you helped me remember who I am and why I wanted to serve in the first place." "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you going to do when you get home? I mean, after everything that happened here, are you going to stay in the military?" Sarah had been thinking about that question for weeks. "Yes, I'm going to stay. What happened with Rodriguez was terrible, but it also showed me that there are people like you and Captain Williams and Major Chen who really do believe in honor and integrity. The military isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting to make it better." "I'm glad to hear that. The military needs people like you." The next morning, Joe's squadron prepared for departure. Sarah was working in the medical tent when she heard the familiar sound of helicopter rotors starting up. She stepped outside to watch Joe's aircraft lift off. As the helicopter rose into the morning sky, Sarah saw Joe in the co-pilot's seat. He spotted her standing outside the medical tent and gave her a thumbs up. Then, as the helicopter banked to begin its journey home, Joe brought his hand up to his helmet in one final salute. Sarah snapped to attention and saluted back, holding the position until the helicopter disappeared over the horizon. Later that day, Sarah received a letter that had been delivered by Joe's crew chief before they left. Inside was a photograph of Joe's grandfather in his Vietnam-era flight suit, standing next to a helicopter very similar to the one Joe flew. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in careful handwriting, "Chief Warrant Officer Thomas Running Bear, 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, 1968-1970. A warrior who protected those who could not protect themselves." Below that, in Joe's handwriting, was a note. "Sarah, my grandfather would have been proud to serve with you. Warriors recognize warriors. Never forget that you are stronger than you know. Your friend always, Joe." Sarah kept the photograph and Joe's medicine bundle in her quarters for the rest of her deployment. Whenever she faced difficult days or challenging situations, she would look at the picture of Joe's grandfather and remember Joe's words. Warriors never stand alone. 6 months later, Sarah completed her deployment and returned home to Texas. She had been awarded a commendation medal for her outstanding service as a nurse and her professionalism under difficult circumstances. More importantly, she had rediscovered her confidence and her sense of purpose. Sarah decided to apply for flight nurse training so she could serve on medical evacuation helicopters. She wanted to be the person who flew into dangerous situations to save wounded soldiers, just like Joe had done for her in a different way. As she filled out her application for flight school, Sarah thought about everything she had learned during her deployment. She had learned that bullies exist everywhere, even in places dedicated to honor and service. She had learned that standing up for yourself is hard and sometimes lonely work. But most importantly, she had learned that when you find the courage to fight for what's right, you often discover that you're not fighting alone. 2 years later, Flight Nurse Captain Sarah Martinez was serving on a medical evacuation helicopter in Afghanistan. She had saved dozens of lives and had become known for her calm professionalism under fire. Her crew trusted her completely, and wounded soldiers often said that seeing her face was the first moment they believed they were going to survive. One day, while her helicopter was refueling at a forward operating base, Sarah noticed another helicopter landing nearby. As the crew climbed out, she recognized the pilot immediately. Captain Joe Running Bear looked older and more weathered, but his walk was the same, and his serious dark eyes were unchanged. When he spotted Sarah, his face broke into a wide smile. "Lieutenant Martinez," he called out, then corrected himself. "I'm sorry, Captain Martinez." "Joe Running Bear, what are you doing here?" Same thing you are. Saving lives and serving our country. Though I heard you've gotten pretty good at the life-saving part. They talked for an hour, catching up on everything that had happened since Fob Thunder. Joe told her about his missions and his plans after the military. Sarah told him about flight nurse school and the wounded soldiers she had helped evacuate. As Joe prepared to leave for his next mission, he paused and looked at Sarah seriously. "Sarah, I want you to know something. My grandfather's spirit is proud of the warrior you've become, and so am I." This time, when Joe saluted her, Sarah didn't cry. She returned the salute with confidence and pride, knowing that she had earned the respect of her fellow warriors through her own courage and dedication. As Joe's helicopter lifted off, Sarah touched the medicine bundle she still carried in her pocket. She thought about all the wounded soldiers she had helped save, all the young nurses she had mentored, and all the times she had stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. She was Captain Sarah Martinez, flight nurse, United States Army. She was a healer and a warrior, and she would never stand alone.